Today we're going to talk about the properties of water, and the goal of this video is to explain how unique properties of water are essential to living organisms. Let's first talk about the chemical structure of water. Water is composed of 3 atoms. There's 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogens. This is actually where the formula H2O comes from. Water is shaped like Mickey Mouse, and covalent bonds connect the 2 hydrogens to the 1 oxygen. Now let's talk about the properties of water. The first property is that water is a polar molecule. Water molecules are polar because they have a partial positive charge on the hydrogens and a partial negative charge on the oxygen, and more electrons surround the oxygen, making the oxygen more electronegative. So basically, one end of water is more negative and the other end of water is more positive. And that's what creates this polarity. Now, because water is a polar molecule, this results in the formation of hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds form between water molecules. The partially positive hydrogens are attracted to the partially negative oxygens. Now let's move to the second property of water. Water is a universal solvent. Water has the unique ability to dissolve many, maybe even most, polar and ionic substances. And this is important to all living things because as water travels through the water cycle, it takes many valuable nutrients along with it. And you can see in this image, there's a substance that's been dropped into water, and the water pulls that substance apart based on the charges that it's made up of. The parts of the substance that are positively charged are attracted to the negatively charged oxygen in water, and the parts of the substance that are negatively charged are attracted to the positively charged hydrogens in the water. Now let's talk about the third property of water. Water has cohesive and adhesive properties. By cohesive, we mean that water molecules can stick to other water molecules. By adhesive, we mean that water molecules can stick to other charged substances, something other than water. And you can see in this image where the water molecules are connecting, that is an example of cohesion, how water can stick to water. But when water molecules stick to some other substance, that's an example of adhesion. These cohesive and adhesive properties turn out to be essential for what's called fluid transport in many forms of life. For example, these cohesive and adhesive properties allow nutrients to be transported to the top of a tree against the force of gravity. Perhaps you've wondered, if not, here's a question for you. How is it that water can get from the roots of a tree up to the very top of the tree, even though gravity is pulling that water down? That's because there are these cohesive and adhesive properties that water has that allow water molecules to stick together and to stick to the parts of the tree and basically climb up to the top of the tree. Let me say one more thing about cohesion. Cohesion results in surface tension, and surface tension is the tendency of a liquid surface to resist rupture when placed under tension or stress. And here's an example. Surface tension allows small organisms like this spider to walk on the surface of the water. Water is also less dense as a solid than as a liquid. This is why ice floats. And this property is important because it keeps ponds, lakes, and oceans from freezing solid, and it allows life, the organisms underneath the surface, to continue to thrive. Another property of water is that it has a high heat capacity. And here's something for you to think about. Perhaps you've been near a pool on a very hot summer day, and the concrete edge of the pool is very, very hot. Like when your feet are on it, you're probably thinking, ouch, this really hurts. But then the water somehow remains pretty cold. And maybe you've wondered, how is that? It's both substances, the water and this concrete, have been sitting under the same hot sun all day long, but the concrete's extremely hot and the water stays cold. How is that? That's because water has a high heat capacity. The water is able to take a lot of energy without changing its temperature. And this can actually help regulating temperature in the environment. So, this property of water allows the temperature of water in a pond to stay relatively constant from day to night, regardless of the changing atmospheric temperature. And again, you can imagine this would be helpful for organisms that live in the water and plants that depend on the water to be getting water that's at a relatively constant temperature. The last property of water that I want to discuss is that water has a high heat of vaporization. Basically, water is converted from its liquid form into steam when the heat of vaporization is reached. And humans and other animals that sweat use this property of water to cool off. Since sweat is made mostly of water, the evaporating sweat, the evaporating water, absorbs your excess body heat, and this excess heat is released into the atmosphere and it produces this cooling effect, and this is known as evaporative cooling. So, to sum up, we've looked at the chemical structure of water and several properties of water that are essential for life.